Lieutenant Mason Reed had been expecting many things when he got transferred to the ISS Peregrine, but sharing a small room with two alien sisters was not one of them. As soon as he stepped off the shuttle and onto the steel-gray halls of the military ship, things started going wrong. His orders were clear report to engineering, settle into his assigned quarters, and begin his shift at 0600. But when he arrived at the administration terminal, a young ensign looked up at him with a sheepish expression and said, "Lieutenant Reed, there's been a slight issue with your housing file." Mason raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" The ensign tapped nervously on his datapad. "Looks like your quarters were accidentally assigned to someone else. And, the ship's full. Overflow rooms are also taken. So, Command says you'll be sharing with two Varnari engineers, Vetra and Kelty." "Sharing?" Mason blinked. "Like a room."
Always.
The ensign hesitated. "Yes, and also the bed. It's a Varnara-style platform, large enough for all three of you." Apparently Mason had no words for a full 5 seconds. "You're serious?" "Orders from above," the ensign said with a weak shrug. "It's wartime. Logistics are tight. We'll need to report to engineering in 20 minutes. With his duffel slung over his shoulder, Mason walked through the winding corridors of the Peregrine, thinking this was a terrible start to what was supposed to be a fresh assignment. He had worked with aliens before, but the Varnari were something else entirely, known for their glowing skin, silent communication, and mirror-like movements. They always traveled in pairs, often bonded twins. Rumor was, if you spoke a thought too loudly around them, they could practically hear it. He arrived at the door labeled Quarters to Sia and stepped inside, only to freeze in place. The room was dimly lit with soft amber lights, single wide sleeping platforms stretched along one side. On the other, workbenches lined with glowing tools. And standing near the center were two Varnari females, identical in every Wastelander forms. Shimmering skin that shifted with light and long braided tendrils that seemed to sway even without wind. Their eyes wide and clear, locked onto Mason the moment he entered. "You are the human," one said. "Obviously," Mason replied, unsure which of them had spoken. "We did not ask for a third." Mason tried a polite smile. "Neither did. I blame Command. I'm Mason Reed, Lieutenant Engineer." The other twin tilted her head, the motion mirrored perfectly by her sister. "We are Vetra and Kelty. We require silence during sleep. You radiate disorganized thoughts." Mason frowned. "I'll try not to think too loudly." They did not laugh. Instead, one walked to the bed and activated the heat lamp mounted. Overhead, the warmth spread instantly, and Mason felt sweat bead on his forehead. Great. They liked it hot. On the other hand, slept with a cooling blanket. This was going to be a nightmare. That night was worse than he imagined. He lay stiffly on one edge of the wide platform, while the twins, already used to sharing space, curled under the lamp. The heat was unbearable, and Mason kept shifting, trying not to roll into their side. He didn't dare speak, knowing it would only make things worse. Sleep, when it came, was restless and short. The next morning, they reported to engineering. It didn't take long for the differences to show. Mason liked hands-on fixes, quick thinking, adapting to problems in the moment. The twins, by contrast, moved as a unit, methodical, silent, and exact. During their first repair assignment, a cooling pump issue in the forward section, Mason reached for a tool, just as Vetra did. Their hands bumped. Kelty glared. Mason apologized. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. Things didn't improve during the second shift. Mason accidentally reprogrammed a valve sequence the twins had already calibrated. Tempers flared not in yelling, but in cold words and sharper silence. "You interrupt our sync," Kelty told him. "You create chaos." "And you two shut me out," Mason shot back. "I can't guess what you're doing unless you actually say something." Command received a complaint. But instead of reassignment, the answer came back brief. "No room. Make it work." And that was that. Days passed with awkward silence. At night, Mason tried sleeping with noise-canceling plugs. The twins requested a privacy curtain. During work, they divided tasks separately, rarely speaking. The other crew members whispered about this strange trio: a human and two Varnari in one room, on one bed. It sounded like the start of a bad joke. But no one could deny the three of them had talent if only they could stop getting in each other's way. It was on the fifth day that the situation began to shift. A minor reactor relay had failed in one of the outer modules. The system was old, unstable, and dangerous. Mason volunteered. The twins followed without a word. The repair zone was tight, the heat stifling. Sparks flew as Mason worked beneath the relay casing. A sudden burst of static knocked a tool from Kelty's hand, and without thinking, Mason threw himself forward, shielding her from the discharge. It was only a jolt, but it could have burned her badly. Vetra helped her sister sit up. Kelty looked at Mason with wide eyes, not anger this time, but something closer to confusion. Or maybe respect. "You acted before thinking," she said slowly. "Yeah," Mason muttered. "It's what I do." That night, the room was still hot, the bed still cramped, but the silence wasn't quite so sharp. And for the first time, Mason noticed that their bioluminescent glow wasn't just eerie, it was oddly comforting. Somewhere in that tight little room on the Peregrine, something had shifted. Not peace. Not yet. But maybe. The start of understanding. The silence between Mason, Vetra, and Kelty had started to crack, but it hadn't disappeared. Days after the reactor relay incident, they were sent to repair a damaged thruster core, an essential part of the Peregrine's propulsion system. It was supposed to be a routine fix, something even first-year techs could manage with the right tools. But the moment they entered the thruster chamber, the differences between them came back stronger than ever. Vetra and Kelty moved in complete silence, passing tools between each other without speaking, predicting each other's actions like two halves of one mind. Mason, on the other hand, worked out loud. He talked to himself, checked systems manually, and made last-minute changes on instinct. While the twins followed a perfect flow, Mason adjusted on the fly-end that clashed terribly at one point. While Kelty was aligning a stabilizer coil, Mason rerouted a power line, thinking it would speed up the process. It did. It reset the sequence she was working on. The system blinked red. Kelty hissed in frustration, and Vetra dropped her tool with an audible click. They turned to face him, identical expressions of cold disapproval on their glowing faces. "Your thoughts are noise," Kelty said flatly. "You disrupt our process." Mason held up his hands. "I was trying to help. You two don't say anything. I can't read your minds." Vetra narrowed her eyes. "That is the point. We work in sync. You interrupt. You bring chaos." Mason's jaw tightened. "I bring results. That's why Command paired me with you, like it or not." The air between them became thick with tension. Without another word, they packed up the tools and left the chamber, the failed repair hanging in the air like smoke, before anyone could request reassignment or another awkward team reshuffle. A more urgent task came through, a critical fault in Sector 4's life support systems. A water purification line had ruptured, and the backup oxygen flow was failing. If they didn't fix it fast, several decks would become uninhabitable. The three were ordered to respond immediately. Mason didn't speak as they suited up. Twins remained silent too, their glowing skin pulsing slightly faster than usual, a sign of stress or agitation. Mason wasn't sure. They entered Sector 4 through a narrow service tunnel that led into a mechanical bay packed with humming pipes, sparking wires and warning lights flashing red across the control board. Kelty climbed up to the main conduit, Vetra took the lower valves, and Mason moved to the control console to try and isolate the failure. At first, they worked in uneasy silence, each focused on their part. But then, without warning, a sharp hum filled the air, the kind that made your teeth vibrate. The lights flickered. Mason glanced at the console. "Surge coming. Is everyone clear?" he shouted, but there wasn't enough time. The emergency systems failed to respond. Sparks erupted from the upper coils. Kelty lost her grip and began to fall toward a live cable. Instinct took over. Mason lunged forward and grabbed her, twisting just in time to avoid the sparks. He slammed a manual override lever with his other hand, diverting the current and shutting down the surge. The entire bay went dark for 3 seconds, followed by the soft whir of emergency lights kicking in. Vetra rushed over, her face unreadable. Mason was breathing hard, his hands scorched and his uniform slightly charred. Kelty looked at him with wide, shocked eyes. "You reacted before we knew?" she said quietly. "Moved faster than we could calculate." Mason nodded, his voice hoarse. "That's what humans do. Sometimes we just know when something's about to go wrong. We don't always wait for the plan." For a long moment, neither twin said anything. Then Vetra stepped closer and placed her fingers on the side of her head, a gesture of invitation. "Would you allow us to connect?" Mason blinked. "Connect? You mean the neural interface?" Kelty nodded. "We use it to share thoughts and intentions. It is how we coordinate so well. We have never shared it with a human before." Mason hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If it helps us work better together, let's try it." Back in their quarters, Vetra brought out a small crystal-like device, shaped like a star and faintly glowing. She pressed it gently against Mason's temple. A rush of warmth and strange clarity swept over him. It wasn't words he heard, but impressions, emotions, intentions. He could feel the precision of Kelty's thoughts, the logic of Vetra's mind, and how they flowed together like two currents in the same river. For the first time, he understood how they worked, not through plans alone, but shared instinct and trust. And to his surprise, they were learning something from him too. Flexibility, improvisation, the value of split-second choices. The connection only lasted a minute, but it changed everything. When it ended, Mason staggered slightly, blinking. That was incredible. Vetra smiled, actually smiled then. Kelty tilted her head thoughtfully. "Your mind is loud, but not without value," Kelty said. "You think in sparks, not patterns. But sometimes sparks are what's needed." Mason grinned. "Guess we're learning each other's tricks now." That night, the room felt different. The heat lamp still glowed, and the bed was just as crowded. But Mason didn't mind as much. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was thoughtful, quiet hum of minds starting to understand one another. Somewhere out there, the war continued. Systems broke, and ships drifted through dark space. But here in one small room aboard the Peregrine, human and 2 alien engineers had taken their first real step, not just as teammates, but as a team. Life aboard the ISS Peregrine had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Mason, Vetra, and Kelty, once an awkward, frustrated team forced into a shared room, had grown into something closer to a unit. A rhythm of minds that started to make sense even in the chaos of space. The Neuralink sessions helped. At first, the link was brief and limited, only allowing flashes of thought and instinct. But as trust grew, so did the connection. Mason began to understand how the twins processed problems, not in a straight line, but in overlapping waves of logic and emotion. They, in turn, started to appreciate Mason's way of approaching repairs. Hands-on, gut-driven, and unafraid to improvise when time ran short. Their missions became smoother. When a coolant system went offline on Deck 7, they solved it in half the time expected. When a data relay malfunctioned, Mason rerouted the signals before the twins even asked. Without needing to speak much, the three moved as one H, bringing something the others lacked, back in their shared quarters. The once tense atmosphere had turned almost comfortable. The bed, which had caused arguments in the beginning, became something of a shared experiment. Mason crafted a rotating heat-tan cooling panel from spare parts, allowing the twins their warmth while giving himself a cool breeze. The first night it worked. Kelty jokingly called him Tinker, and the name stuck. Mason, in return, started calling Vetravolt for her sharp precision and quick thinking. They laughed quietly in the evenings now, a strange sound on a military ship filled with stress and silence. Their room became known among the crew not for its conflicts anymore, but for its unusual harmony. People whispered stories about the Tricore, as some called them. Others, seeing their work, simply respected it. But peace never lasted long on the Peregrine. One morning, the ship received a high-priority signal. A Vernari human research vessel named Lumen's Reach had gone dark in a disputed zone near the edge of Kex-controlled space. The crew was believed to be alive but stranded, and the ship's location made the mission dangerous. The Peregrine was the closest vessel and was ordered to assist immediately. Tension spread through the halls as the ship changed course. Mason, Vetra, and Keelty were briefed along with the senior engineering staff.
Yeah.
Their job would be to support the core systems during the rescue approach, thrusters, power flow, emergency containment. It wasn't unusual, but the pressure was high. Everyone was on alert. As they neared the last known coordinates of the Lumen's Reach, the lights flickered. Then the ship's main diagnostics failed. Several subsystems went offline at once: air scrubbers, internal doors, environmental controls. Red lights blinked across the engineering deck. Sabotage. That word was whispered through comms even before the full damage report came in. Someone or something had triggered a silent override buried deep in the Peregrine's automated repair system. Only the manual pathways still worked, and they were mostly located in the hazardous lower core, where radiation shielding was limited and temperatures could spike dangerously. The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm but sharp. Engineering Team 3 Reed, Vetra, Kelty. Report to Core Access 7 immediately. You're the only sync team trained for deep core manual override. We need propulsion and life support restored within the hour. There's no time for questions. The trio suited up in lightweight radiation armor and took the service lifts down to decks. The core was a place few engineers liked to visit. It pulsed with energy, thick with heat and mechanical noise. Lights flickered, steam hissed from broken pipes. The emergency generators buzzed low and weak. Vetra took point, her fingers flying. Over the manual console, primary control nodes are unresponsive, she said. We will need to rewire the relay grid from inside the cooling chamber. Kelty scanned the readings. Radiation is spiking. We must move quickly. Mason pulled his toolkit closer. We've handled worse, he said with a grin, trying to ease the tension. But in truth, he'd never seen the Peregrine this unstable. If they failed, it wouldn't just be a broken ship. It could mean lives. Lost both here and on the Lumen's Reach, they climbed into the core's central ring, where heat shimmered off metal walls and lights turned blood red. Mason moved to the manual levers while the twins accessed the capacitor nodes. The work was fast and dangerous. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and every second pushed their suits closer to thermal limits. Yet somehow, they worked in perfect harmony. When Mason reached for a broken panel, Vetra already had the right tool in hand. When Kelty needed a bypass code, Mason shouted it from memory. Even without the Neuralink fully active, they were tuned into each other, reading the flow of action, like musicians in a shared rhythm. Still, something felt off. Mason noticed a secondary control conduit blinking in a strange pattern. This wasn't part of the sabotage, he muttered. It's active, but not from here. He tapped into it manually and found a strange feedback loop, directing energy into the backup thruster banks, something no crew system should be doing. Before he could trace the origin, a shockwave hit the outer hull. The entire core shook. Kelty stumbled. Vetra caught her. Hurry, she said. This loop is feeding false data to the nav systems. It could send us straight into Kex territory. Mason's hands flew across the wiring, pulling, twisting, isolating signals. A wrong move here could shut down power to half the ship or worse. But he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for a blueprint. He felt what needed to be done, letting his instincts work with everything he had learned from the twins. A moment later, the lights stabilized. Power surged back into the systems. In clean, steady waves, oxygen levels normalized. Control returned to the main bridge. The Peregrine had avoided disaster, but just barely. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, their suits steaming from heat. Kelty looked at him with wide eyes. You would not have seen that signal. You're pattered. Your instinct caught. Mason smiled, tired but proud. Guess chaos has its uses after all. Vetra gave a small nod. You're not just part of the team now, she said softly. You are the team. In that blazing core, surrounded by danger and sparks, something stronger than duty had taken root. A bond forged in metal, heat, and the quiet trust of three minds learning to work as one. The silence after stabilizing the ship didn't last long. A sharp pulse echoed through the Peregrine's comes. Another distress signal from the Lumen's reach, this time closer, more urgent. But something about the signal felt off. The timing was too perfect, the frequency too polished. Still, with orders in hand, the Peregrine moved forward, drawing near the source. Mason, Vetra, and Kelty were still in the core chamber when the ship jerked violently, lights flickering as the hull shuddered with impact. Sirens blared as the captain's voice echoed across all decks. Alert! We are under attack. Hostile presence confirmed. Keck's fleet detected. All units to battle stations. The trio froze only for a moment. It hadn't been a real distress signal. It was beta trap laid by the Keks, machine-based species who believed that all organic engineers corrupted technology with their instincts and emotions. To them, humans and Varnari alike were threats that needed to be erased. Before anyone could respond, a secondary explosion rocked the ship. The reactor core's temperature began to spike. Systems started failing one by one. The automated controls were already down from the previous sabotage. If the core overheated, it wouldn't just cripple the ship, it would tear it apart from the inside. Engineering control issued the worst kind of command: manual stabilization. 3 override terminals spread across the core chamber had to be operated in perfect sync, and there was only one team on board with a chance of pulling it off. Suited up and sweating before the job even started, Mason, Vetra, and Kelty rushed to their positions. The chamber was massive, its machinery glowing red, heat rising in waves. Warning lights flashed everywhere and steam hissed from pressure valves near bursting. Vetra and Kelty didn't need to speak, they simply moved, their minds locking into a deep mental sync. Mason watched them from across the chamber, heart pounding, trying to steady his breathing. They could move like one, but this task needed 3, and the distances between control points were too far for any 2 to cover alone. Mason knew he didn't have their telepathy, but he had something else now: experience. He had learned to read their rhythm, to feel their flow like music. And he threw himself into that rhythm now. As the twins activated their terminals, Mason began working his own. Fingers dancing across scorched panels, reading power flows like instinct, cutting wires were needed, and bridging connections with a speed even he didn't know he had. Sync had to be perfect. Every second, a slight delay could overload a capacitor or melt a circuit. Vetra's thoughts flowed with precision, Kelty's reactions lightning fast, and Mason wild, creative, but now tuned into their dance filled in the gaps they couldn't see. When a surge hit Vetra's panel, Mason rerouted it without waiting for confirmation. When Kelty faltered under the pressure of a misaligned coil, Mason adjusted his sequence to buy her time. The 3 of them, across the screaming heart of the ship, began to move like a single living system. The heat became unbearable. Mason's suit sensors warned of critical temperatures, but he didn't stop. Neither did the twins. They were locked into something deeper than just a mission. This was survival, not just of the ship, but of the trust they had built. Outside the core, the Keks launched a second wave, their weapons slicing into the Peregrine's shields. The ship fired back, and the blast of counterfire shook the chamber again. One of the coolant lines snapped loose, sending a wave of gas toward Kelty's station. Mason saw it, and without thinking, jumped from his panel, secured the line midair, and sealed the leak before rolling back to his station, bruised but grinning. "Still alive," he called out, though he didn't expect an answer. But through the neural link, even with his limited connection, he felt it, a pulse of emotion from the twins. Not just focus, but admiration. Mason returned to his terminal. Just as the reactor reached critical, final sequence had to be triggered within 3 seconds by all 3 panels, or the entire system would collapse. Vetra's voice echoed through the link for the first time, quiet and steady. "Ready." T's response followed, sharp and clear. "Now." Mason's hand hovered for just a moment, feeling the pulse of their minds, and then he pressed the final key. The core roared, lights surged white hot, and then silence. Cooling systems hummed to life. The heat dropped. The warning lights faded. The Peregrine, still wounded, still shaking, was safe. The Keck ships, caught off guard by the unexpected counterattack, broke off and retreated into the void. In the silence that followed, Mason collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Across from him, the twins looked the same, exhausted, sweat-slicked, but still glowing faintly. Vetra leaned against the console, her voice soft, ordinary. Team could have done this. Mason looked at them, smiling through the pain. Good thing we're not ordinary. And in that moment, surrounded by metal, heat, and the scars of battle, three very different minds knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the days following the battle, the atmosphere aboard the Peregrine shifted from tense survival to quiet celebration. The Keck's trap had been avoided, the ship had been saved from reactor failure, and the disabled Lumen's Reach was successfully escorted back to safe territory. But among all the repair crews and recovery teams, it was Mason, Vetra, and Kelty who received the highest praise. During a small but formal gathering in the main hall, the captain himself presented them with a commendation for bravery and ingenuity under fire. The ship's AI Arcos projected a holographic model of their manual synchronization during the crisis, calling it a breakthrough in cooperative multi-species engineering. Word spread fast through the fleet. Command sent a formal request to observe their work methods, noting the Neuralink adaptation and Mason's improvisational style as key factors for future training protocols. Mason wasn't used to attention like this. He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly when his name was called, letting the twins do most of the talking. But even Kelty, usually blunt and serious, couldn't hide the faint upward curl of her lips when the crowd clapped. After the ceremony, Command sent another message, this one personal. Space had opened up in the crew's quarters, and the trio was now eligible for individual rooms. Privacy, personal space, temperature control, the kind of comfort that Mason had once begged for. He read the offer twice, looked at Vetra and Kelty, and they all shook their heads at the same time. No words needed. They'd earned something better than comfort. They'd earned trust, and they weren't giving it up for walls. So the room remained theirs. Same heat lamp, same cooling system, same wide bed with a little less awkwardness than before. That evening, Mason walked into the room, dropped his toolkit near the bench, and stretched with a groan. The heat lamp clicked on with a soft hum, warming one side of the room, while his cooling blanket kicked in on the other. The air smelled faintly of solder and citrus the way the Varnari liked it. Vetra and Kelty were seated at the workbench. Surrounded by scattered blueprints and glowing tools, they were building something new, plans for a shared workshop module. It requested to attach near the ship's secondary engineering deck. It wasn't official yet, but given their reputation, now no one was likely to say no. Is that the gravity-stable workbench layout? Mason asked, leaning over their shoulders. Kelty nodded. With vibration dampeners this time. Your last welding job nearly shook the brackets loose. It added character, Mason replied, grinning. Vetra raised an eyebrow, nearly added a hole in the floor. They all laughed, genuine, light and easy. Mason walked over to the small shelf where they kept snacks and drinks, retrieved 3 squeeze flasks, and held one up. To chaos, logic, and compromise, he said with a mock salute. Kelty tapped her flask against his, followed by Vetra. And 2 not being ordinary, Vetra added. We weren't meant to be. The room fell into a peaceful quiet after that. Not from discomfort, but from comfort that didn't need filling. The soft glow from the lamp reflected off the twins' bioluminescent skin, painting the room in warm colors. Mason relaxed into his side of the bed, adjusting his cooling blanket with one foot while eyeing the new schematics the twins had left on the floor. He was already imagining new upgrades, things they could build together, not just tools, but systems, ideas, maybe. Even protocols that other crews could use. What started as a mistake, a room assignment no one wanted, had become something the entire ship now relied on. A bridge between species, between minds, between ways of thinking. Outside their room, the ship floated forward through the stars, scanning for threats, waiting for its next call to action. But in this small pocket of calm, 3 engineers, 1 human, 2. Varnard had already done the impossible, not by being the same, but by learning to work together despite everything. And as Mason closed his eyes, Kelty dimmed the lamp, and Vetra carefully sorted the tools back into their magnetic case. The quiet hum of the ship wrapped around them like a heartbeat. One team, one room, one purpose, 3 engineers, one mind, and the universe would never see it coming.